Welcome to Madlik. My name is Geoffrey Stern, and at Madlik we light a spark or shed some light on a Jewish text or tradition. Along with Rabbi Adam Mintz, we host Madlik Disruptive Torah on Clubhouse and share it as the Madlik podcast on your favorite platform. This week's Torah portion is Achrei Mot-Kedoshim. It contains what is known as the Holiness Code, which describes and prescribes pretty much every sexual deviation. It is the perfect opportunity to celebrate and review a radical responsa that was published earlier this year. It was written by Rabbi Jeffrey Fox and called Gay Women, Nashim Mesolelot, a Teshuva, and published by Maharat Yeshiva. So join us for women who love Torah. Well, welcome, Rabbi, to another exciting week of Madlik Disruptive Torah. How are you this week?
I'm well, and I'm really excited about our conversation. Each week is good, but this week might be special.
Well, as I said, Rabbi Jeffrey Fox is the Rosh Yeshiva of Maharat, and I believe you teach at Maharat. So we sure do. We are hoping that we get a lot of insight. I did say that he wrote a radical responsa. So before we even begin reading our Pasha, I just want to say how, if you look back at the history of biblical law and how it is made and how it is changed, it really is a responsa. And what is a responsa? In Hebrew, it's a shayla ve'teshuva. It's when Jethro comes and confronts Moses and asks him a question, and Moses then goes to God for an answer. It's when the daughters of Tzalafchad ask a question that impacts their personal life, and Moses, the halachic authority of the moment, has to come up with an answer. And what's fascinating about that, as opposed to what we normally do, which is just look at texts and try to analyze them, is here we are looking at when the halacha, the rubber hits the road. It's when you capture a moment in our history, whether it's the daughters of Tzalafchad or it's at the foot of Mount Sinai with Jethro. You get to capture a moment in history where something has changed and demands an answer. That's very exciting. What does responsa, sha'ala v'tshuva, mean to you, Rabbi?
So, especially in this case, it means taking the traditional law, the traditional practice, and applying it to contemporary modern situations. That's the difference between a sheila u'tshuva, a responsum, and just a legal book. A legal book just tells you the law. A responsa tries to apply that law to a very specific case. And this is a perfect example of someone trying to apply the law in general to a very specific issue.
I was thinking about it. In addition to all that we've said till now, it also has a traditional form. And in that sense, it's almost like a sonnet, and it can be almost judged by how well written it is, how within the guidelines and the rails of how a halachic discussion and argument is made, how it's put together. And I think the other part of it, because if you download, and there is a link to download the full responsa on our Sefirah source sheet, you will see that at least 30%, 40% of it is Rabbi Jeffrey Fox had the chutzpah, the gall, or I would say the self-confidence, to invite peer review and attach it to his responsa. And peer review is also something that I think is so special about the responsa tradition. You are engaging with prior opinion, and you're inviting your peers and then ultimately the future scholars to interact with you. And this responsa, I encourage everyone to read it. There's going to be parts of it that are going to be above your pay grade. There were parts of it that were above my pay grade. But it's a wonderful example of this tradition of Sha'alot v'Teshuvot that has made our Torah so adoptable and such a living Torah.
I agree with you 100%. And you're right. I mean, don't be put off with the fact that there's some very technical halakhic Gemara arguments. Everybody can understand the main point of this. And I think that's what we're going to talk about tonight.
And before we take off, I should also say that some of the great writings of Maimonides are his Epistle of Yemen, his letter to Ovadia the Ger, the convert. It's not, many times we read pieces of Torah, Midrash or whatever, it's hard to pinpoint one period they were written in, what were the contexts of their writing. You don't have that in a responsa. The responsa is responding to a question. So again, the responsa is gay women. It's called Gay Women Responsa. You can Google it. It's Maharat. They're showing it put on their website. And the reason we're discussing it this week, as I said in the intro, is in Leviticus 18. It talks about all of these sexual perversions. It has, a man cannot lie with a man. All of this stuff. You might recognize it even if you go to synagogue once a year on Yom Kippur, because yes, we read it on Yom Kippur. So we're going to focus initially on just one verse, because it's that verse that he brings to trigger the first discussion. It's Leviticus 18:1-3, and it says, God spoke to Moses saying, speak to the Israelite people and say to them, I am God, am your God. You shall not copy the practices of the land of Egypt where you dwelt, or of the land of Canaan to which I am taking you, nor shall you follow their laws. Seems pretty innocuous. But ultimately, what happens is that in this long list of things that can't be done, it says nowhere that a woman cannot lie with a woman. So to get to that prohibition, if one needs to get to it, or if one feels that the halacha demands one gets to it, one has to read the Sifra. And in the Sifra, it says, as the deed of the land of Egypt, I might think that means you shall not build or plant as they do. And therefore, it is written, and their statutes shall not walk. So we already have that prohibition. So what does this come to forbid? What did they do in Egypt and Canaan that you're not allowed to do? A man would wed a man and a woman a woman. And then it goes on to describe a few more. So there are two fascinating things about this Sifra if we are laser focused on the issue of where is it explicitly forbidden for a lesbian relationship. Number one, it is admitting without saying as much, that it's not specifically listed in the Torah, and that it has to hang itself on this things that were done in Egypt. And the other part of it is that we have another Vayikra Rabbah, which talks about and amplifies this, and it says, Rav Hana said in the name of Reb Yossi, the generation of the flood was wiped out only because they wrote marriage contracts for men and women. So the rabbis, and he follows different threads within rabbinic tradition, how they took this. But this is one of the legs upon which there were arguments made that women cannot lie with women. And it therefore has two things about it. It has, one, maybe the sexual act, and two, it talks about that they wrote marriage documents for men and women, and this interpretation believes that they wrote marriage documents between a man and a woman and a woman. So the Rabbi Jeff takes a long time to track these different ideas through the halachic commentaries, and ultimately the big question is it forbidden? Why does it have to say explicitly that it was forbidden? I mean, there are many places in our Parsha that it talks about different things, and it says it is a toeva, it is zima, it is a depravity, it is a terrible thing. But it doesn't, at the end of the day, ultimately say that about a lesbian sexual relationship. And what he is trying, I'd like to think, and I'd love your opinion on this, Rabbi, is yes, because he is writing within the constraints of a Teshuva, he has to literally link all of the opinions and map them. But what's fascinating to me on a page of any page of Talmud is many scholars try to chart it out. They'll actually get a blackboard and try to put all of the different opinions together. What I'm always fascinated is by the multiplicity of the opinions. And as I read this Teshuva, and we're going to start picking up on some of that, what's fascinating to me is, even from the get-go, the fact that the rabbis kind of recognized this type of a relationship, and they recognize that it wasn't explicitly mentioned, is something to take note of. And then they bring the question of marriage as opposed to just a relationship. We're starting to get the different ingredients of a discussion.
So you said a lot, and I think all of it is right. And I think, you start with the verse in this week's parsha, and you start with a sifra. The sifra takes it in a direction that it doesn't have to take it in. Means the idea that what's wrong with Egypt is, homosexual relationships is not explicit anywhere. And that's interesting that they take it in that direction, that they were thinking, about those kinds of things. And what's interesting, the verses, this is called the arayot. This is the forbidden and the illicit sexual relations. This is a famous Torah reading, because on Yom Kippur, at Mincha, we read this Torah reading. So it's familiar to people. And a homosexual male relationship, a man and a man, is actually explicitly mentioned in the Torah as being prohibited. That's what it says. Vet zachar lo tishkav mishkevei isha. A man is not allowed to lie with a man. Toevahi. It is considered to be an abomination. So that's explicit in the Torah. A lesbian relationship is not mentioned anywhere. So that kind of gives room for this tshuva to be written. And that's what he's trying to deal.
And in the criticisms, you could easily criticize him right there and say, why is he putting on this narrow focus? Because in a sense, what he's saying is, I'm not worried about the men right now. I want to focus on the women. But there is one response written by a woman, Rachel Fried is her name, who says she feels that as a lesbian woman, she has been ignored. Because, you could argue that she should feel like she's dodged a bullet, because there are many Orthodox women who would say the Torah doesn't say anything about a lesbian relationship, so I dodged a bullet. What she is feeling is that she's been left out, is that the Torah is not even talking about here. There are a number of quotes, one associated with Rav Moshe Feinstein, who wrote beautiful halachic responsa, who basically, and by the way, you said that many parts of this responsa are very technical. They're also very graphic.
That's right.
So he quotes Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, and he sums it up as saying, you can't have illicit sex without a penis. So in a sense, it was almost saying that women are overlooked because it doesn't matter. The relationship between women doesn't matter. She says that really, I almost wish the pasuk did include women, so that at least I could be part of the narrative. Instead, women are treated as if the Torah prohibitions apply to them directly when they aren't even written in the story. To me, this represents one of the worst kinds of erasure. And she thanks Rabbi Fox for bringing her into the conversation.
Right.
There's
so that's interesting. I mean, there's so much there that's interesting, right? You're right that a lot of people would say, wow, lesbians avoided the problem, right?
Yeah. So let's talk about that for a second, because she starts by writing something that I find the most fascinating. She says, understanding the differences between descriptions and identities is necessary in order to have a productive conversation. Meaning to say that I started by saying you can't have a teshuva without a shayla. You can't have a responsa unless there's a need. And Rabbi Jeffrey Fox defines what the need is. He says, we are living in a time when too many great Rabbanim and Poskim view Torah through a lens that destroys the lives of gay women, in parentheses, and men. The Gemara is trying to teach us that sometimes, even after many years of deep learning, there is a need to go back into the cave and rethink our approach. And he really feels, and he must have gotten this firsthand. If he was here, I would ask him what instigated this teshuva, but I'm sure 100%, and I'm sure you can confirm it to me, that like the name of this podcast, it's women who love Torah. If this was a teshuva written for non-observant, non-connected Jews who say, I really want to eat brownies on Pesach, that would not elicit a teshuva. If it was a non-committed Jewish woman who wanted to have a sanctioned lesbian relationship, that too might not elicit a teshuva. What has changed today is that there is a community of women who love the Torah, who love the 613 commandments, who feel they are a part of the community. And here's where the difference lies, and here's where this woman has hit the nail on the target. This is not a question as much about an act as it is about identity. They were created the way they were created. They love Shabbat, they love mitzvot, and they want who they are sanctioned. And I think that is the paradigm shift that elicited a teshuva like this, a responsa like this. And you can make the argument, and I think Rabbi Fox has made the argument, that a generation or two or three ago, maybe even a generation ago, he says that Rav Moshe Feinstein probably could not even fathom what a loving, long-term, committed lesbian or homosexual relationship could be, and probably could not fathom what all of the different gender identities or lack of identities that we now are understanding are. So this has taken it away from just giving a ruling on an activity to giving a ruling on an identity. And I think that is a major paradigm shift.
I would agree with you. And I think if you read some of the reactions, you see, when you write a responsa, so it's a halachic responsa, means it's based on the halacha. But clearly he is being driven by a motive to be sensitive to lesbian relationships. And basically, if you want to talk about the approach is that he knows where he wants to get to, and he kind of allows the sources to evolve to reach that conclusion. And you're right, he was courageous not only to allow for responses, but responses who didn't necessarily agree with him. That's an amazing thing, right? He actually includes responses that don't agree with him. And they claim the following. At least one of them claims the following, Rabbi Clapper. He says that he jumps too far, meaning that the sources don't say that a lesbian relationship is allowed. They say at very most that a lesbian relationship is not biblically prohibited because the Torah doesn't mention it. It's only rabbinically prohibited. And Rabbi Klaperth says that to jump from there to say that it's permitted and maybe even a holy relationship, he said, quote, he says, Rabbi Fox needs more, more proofs for that. I'm not convinced that he's right. So it's interesting, when the reality that you want to create and the literature that you have don't necessarily agree with one another, how you reconcile the two. That's really a very interesting question.
So I want to get into some of the actual arguments, and there's one. I promised Rabbi Fox that I was going to send him a copy of this podcast. So there's one innovation that I want to bring to the table. In the comments by Rachel Fried, she mentioned something that I had heard anecdotally, but she confirms it. And she confirmed that the irony of this delineation is that many rabbis and community leaders promote the idea of gay men and lesbian women marrying each other so that they can be part of the community and live normal lives. In these arrangements, it is often understood that those two individuals will have extramarital encounters. So, and then she goes on to say that there are shadchanim, matchmakers, who are literally set up to encourage, support this sham. Now, one of the sources that he brings in his responsa is says, this is Rabbi Chaim David Weiss, Yosef Weiss of Satmar, published in 2010. I was also asked by a woman whose husband will not have sex with her, and in order to calm her desire, a friend of hers rubs her privates. Is this forbidden? What it doesn't say is maybe the husband is gay. And he goes on to give his advice. He says, we certainly should rebuke the husband with a strong rebuke for not fulfilling the mitzvah of onah. And nevertheless, this should not be permitted except in a case of really great need. What he means is should not be permitted, that she should not be able to fulfill her sexual desires. And it should only be permitted in a humble fashion with a humble woman. And then he says, I did not permit it at all. So there were so many fascinating things about his answer. He almost, there's something about Teshuvot, about responsa, that you can have an opinion that is maybe a havamina. You might think, and then you give up on the idea. But the fact that you've listed the you might think, it already becomes a part of the halachic record. So here we have this rabbi dealing with a marriage that is not working, recognizing that the woman has her own sexual desires, which in and of itself, in this patrilistical society is interesting, and dealing with these issues. These are real issues. So I just find it totally fascinating how the rabbis nonetheless try to deal with it, and in dealing with it, show a little bit of flexibility. Another interesting case is an androgynous person. A person whose sex is not totally defined. Today, that is part of our nomenclature. We talk about not having pronouns, or for people being able to choose their gender. So one of the halacha it talks about is that an androgynous person cannot marry a man, because he might be considered male, he might be considered female. On the side that he is male, that would be something that was explicitly forbidden. But he can marry a woman. Because, again, there is this line, there is this notion that it's not totally forbidden. It's a peritza ba'alma. It is something that is repugnant, not accepted. Rabbi Fox brings an example of pritza ba'alma, the same language that is used for a woman who eats a sandwich in the street, who darns yarn in the street, who nurses a baby in the street. And one of the arguments that he makes here is that these things are socially subjective. Certain things that might not have been acceptable in the past can become acceptable now. Certainly it's not grounds for divorce if your wife eats a sandwich in the street. And he brings all of these fascinating sources.
They're fascinating. So there are a couple of things you just said. You know, what is considered pritzut, what is considered to be, immodest behavior is probably the right word. And what he points out is that the term immodest behavior is very broadly defined in the Talmudic sources. So to limit it to sexual behavior is just not fair. I think those kind of points are very important because we tend to understand things in a certain way, and he makes the point that that's not necessarily so.
I mean, to me, the go-to is, it says, I believe in Masechta Megillah, that a woman cannot read the Megillah because kavod hatzibur. Well, that was written 1,000 years before there were men's clubs that didn't let a woman come in because of kavod hatzibur. It just wasn't, in those days, it was socially unacceptable. But that begs you to say that in a different generation, where women are surgeons, where women are judges, where women are leaders, that is no longer takes away from the kavod, from the honor of the congregation. I want to get back to another thread that he drops. If you recall, a second ago, I said that when it said you can't be like Mitzrayim, one of the things that it says is that they condoned marriage of man to man and women to women. Actually, it goes on a full list of other things as well. And one of the things that every one of those relationships has in common, according to Rabbi Fox, is that they are marriages made not to have children. They are marriages designed so that you can be a playboy the rest of your life and you don't have to be procreate. And his argument to that is, nowadays with artificial insemination and a change again in society, you can have a same-sex couple who is totally committed to procreation. So again, he talks also, another thread that he has is that really the whole forbidden nature of a same-sex relationship is for a married woman, because it is not honest, it's not respect for her marriage is diminished by it. But a woman who defines her commitment to marriage by a relationship with another woman would be left out. One of the questions in some of the comments from the rabbis, there was one rabbi who said, this goes much, much too far. I wouldn't subscribe to something like this unless you had a bunch of Talmudic rabbi authorities who would sign in. It's almost an invitation. It's an insight into the process that we are watching before our eyes, which means that it takes somebody who is brave, like Rabbi Fox, to be the first. And then over time, maybe, yes, you do get other rabbis who will sign on. And then there's the really big question of, why did he focus only on lesbian relationships, and how does this affect other non-sanctioned relationships? Is it a slippery slope? Or is it, and this is where I think the insight that we talked about before becomes critical. Once you take these laws outside of the realm of forbidden acts and you start talking about identities and how we define how identities are understood, that changes everything. And yes, it is a slippery slope, but not in a flippant way. What it means is it becomes a paradigm shift, that once we can see committed Jewish women who are living wholesome lives, are contributing to the community, are having family lives and all that, it will change our conception of what the identities of people that don't fall into some of the preconceived notions, and we will realize that once they're no longer outliers, they can be looked at differently. I think that's the powerful potential of a Teshuva such as this.
Well, you're saying a whole bunch of things. Let's just take one thing at a time. The first thing is the idea of a paradigm shift. And paradigm shifts are interesting because you're right. You need someone courageous like Rabbi Fox. And but the end of the story, what we would call the last chapter of the book, we don't know what that last chapter is going to look like. Means what he's setting up is that other rabbis will follow. It's very hard to know how the Orthodox rabbinic community is going to respond to this tshuva. It's too soon because the tshuva just came out right before Pesach. So we have to see how they're going to respond. And I think that by including reactions to his tshuva, he's welcoming other people. And maybe, I don't know, we have to invite him onto the show, right, onto the podcast to see whether he is willing to redo some of the halakhic arguments based on comments. I don't know. I'm not sure how he feels about it. But maybe in order to gain consensus, and that's when you have a paradigm shift, sometimes everybody has to give a little bit. Maybe he'd be willing to give a little bit in order to make it more acceptable to a larger group of people.
I listened to a podcast this week that celebrated the first bat mitzvah of Mordechai Kaplan's daughter, which was 100 years ago. And then it noted that 50 years later was the first rabbi, a woman rabbi, to occur. And there's clearly a connection between the two. And so I think that change takes time. But clearly what's happening here is when you make a change like this, the fact that the discourse is done with so much honor and the idea that it's coming within. One of the podcasters who talked about the bat mitzvah says it was fascinating that it was Rabbi Kaplan at those times. They had they had separate seating in the synagogue. The Reform didn't have the first bat mitzvah because they were doing confirmation at age 16. It came out of Orthodox Jewry as much as any of the other strains. And I think that it's fascinating to me that in Maharat, where they give smicha to women, and they really fulfill that thread from bat mitzvah to rabbin smicha and ordination, that here we have the beginning of the next move, and it's being done strictly within the sonnet, the tradition of this peer-reviewed exploration of the texts. And I just think it's fascinating, and I think that we all feel privileged to be an observer of how this is happening. And I think that just to engage all of the thinkers that you have at the end of this tshuva with a respectful conversation bodes well, I think, for the future of really halachic Judaism in the biggest, broadest, richest sense of the word, even if it is a little disruptive.
I would agree with that. It's a perfect topic for today. Shabbat shalom to everybody. Enjoy this challenging parsha, but an amazing parsha. And I just second what Jeffrey said. Take a look at the tshuva. It's long, it's complicated, but it's worth every second. Thank you, Jeffrey, for the topic. Shabbat shalom to everybody.
Shabbat shalom, and I'll see you all next week. Yonatan, how are you, my friend?
Cool. I love this type of rooms. Maybe we should have a whole room to read this Teshuva. You were talking about slippery slope, and it reminded me a scandalous halachic dispute that was going on in the 1700s about a different topic, and this was about shaving the beard on Chol HaMoed. And some rabbis were afraid that this would be a slip. The rabbi of Prague found some heter permission to do it in some way through a Gentile, but other rabbis were afraid that this will be a slippery slope to allow many other prohibitions, because until then it was considered forbidden to shave the beard on Chol HaMoed. And but some rabbis said the opposite. They said, if you are afraid that people would like to throw away the yoke of Torah and to make their life easier, and the way is not to fix this. The way is not to be strict, but the opposite. If people see that you are lenient in the places where you can be lenient according to halacha, and you find ways to allow things, this will keep them more observant and not the other way around.
I couldn't agree more, but I would go even further. It's not a question of keeping these outliers, these people who are pushing the envelope of halacha within the fold. I think they enrich it. They enable us to look at relationships and sexual relationships in a elevated manner. This is how Rabbi Fox actually ends his Teshuva. He says, when two women seek to build a Jewish home together with love and commitment, this can no longer be called even pritzuta. Rather, given the vacuum left to be filled, this should be understood as tzniut, modesty, and perhaps even kedusha, holiness. So he's really not, he's saying this isn't like, okay, I'll let you shave because if you don't shave, maybe you'll just, join the other club or the other side. I really feel that there's a Jewish way of saying slippery slope. And the Jewish way of saying slippery slope is avera goreret avera, that one sin leads to another. But the flip side of that is mitzvah goreret mitzvah, which is that one good deed leads to another. And I would like to believe that in opening the tent and opening up more types of relationships, we actually can understand human love and human connection in a more profound way. Henry, how are you today?
Jeffrey, a gay relationship is so a norm today that I don't know that you necessarily have to go through all these gyrations. The way you've set it up, it's interesting to hear and to see the analysis, I have to say, and I just think you kind of get there where we should be today as opposed to 50 or 100 years ago with your analysis.
Well, first of all, my grandson, as you know, was bar mitzvahed last week, and he had a double portion called Tazria Mitzorah. And I kept on beating myself up and said, couldn't we wait one more week? And now after what you just said, maybe it should have been 3 weeks, or he did good. He did good. The other thing that I will say is that there is another discussion that can be had about any legal system, but certainly the halachic legal decision is how much does it lead and how much does it follow. And I think I would probably agree with you that on items such as this, in items in terms of the Orthodox community, what's happening with egalitarianism, shared minyanim, partner minions, they call them, and things like that. The halacha will follow the people. There is an understanding that you can't make a rule that the community will not accept. And I would argue that the flip side of that is that what the community accepts, the halacha will follow. And I think we're seeing that. It's nice to have scholars like the Jeffrey Fox who are willing to stick their neck out and provide some of that superstructure. And I think that's what also makes this exciting. And again, take a look at the Teshuva, even if you skim it, but especially some of the letters and articles at the end. But thanks for being here, Henry. Great sharing it with you. And I guess that means that a mazel tov and a happy birthday is in order.
And some laning, too.
Sounds good. I saw you on the list this week. Okay, everybody. Shabbat shalom, and we'll see you all next week.